Stop what you're doing and check the time. Right now.
Did you feel that little spike of anxiety? That mental calculation of where you need to be, what you need to do, how much time you have left? That unconscious stress response that fires in your nervous system every time you see those numbers on your screen? Welcome to modern life, where every human being on Earth lives under the tyranny of time. But here's something that will blow your mind. For 99.9% of human history, no one was ever late. No one rushed to catch a train. No one panicked about deadlines. No one said, "I don't have time," because time, as we know it, didn't exist. For over 200,000 years, humans lived by the rhythm of the sun, the moon, and the seasons. They woke when they felt rested, ate when they were hungry, and worked when work needed to be done. Life moved at the pace of nature, not numbers on a dial. There were no meetings to attend, no schedules to keep, no anxiety about wasting time. People lived in what we might call deep time, connected to natural cycles that had governed life on Earth for millions of years. Then, about 5,000 years ago, something changed forever. Humans invented civilization, and with it came humanity's greatest blessing and curse: the measurement of time. We created calendars to track seasons, sundials to divide days, and eventually mechanical clocks that could slice existence into precise, measurable units. What started as a tool to help us coordinate activities gradually became our master. Today you check the time over 100 times per day without even realizing it. Your life is divided into minutes, hours, and seconds. You're either early on time or late. You live in constant awareness of time passing, time wasted, time saved, time running out. Your phone buzzes with calendar reminders, your watch counts your steps and heartbeats, your apps track how you spend every moment. But this obsession with time is incredibly recent in human history. It's an artificial construct that we created, and then allowed to imprison us completely. This is the story of how we gave up our natural freedom and became slaves to the clock. This is the story of how time transformed from humanity's greatest tool into humanity's greatest master. And most importantly, this is the story of how we might reclaim our relationship with time before it destroys our health, happiness, and humanity. Before time ruled our lives with mathematical precision, humans lived in harmony with natural rhythms that had governed life on Earth for millions of years. Our ancient ancestors woke up when sunlight filtered through the trees, not when an alarm clock screamed at them from across the room. They ate when their bodies signaled hunger, not because a clock said it was lunchtime. They slept when darkness fell and their bodies grew tired, not because they had to be up at 7 a.m. for a commute to a job they might not even enjoy. This wasn't lazy or primitive living, it was profoundly intelligent biological design. These early humans understood something we've completely forgotten: that life has its own natural timing that doesn't need to be measured, controlled, or optimized. Their bodies were perfectly synchronized with what scientists call circadian rhythms, the 24-hour biological cycles that still exist in every cell of your body but are constantly disrupted by artificial light, irregular schedules, and time pressure. Modern research has revealed just how sophisticated these natural time systems are. Your body produces different hormones at different times of day. Your brain processes information better at certain hours. Your immune system follows predictable daily patterns, and your creativity peaks and valleys in natural cycles. Our ancestors lived in harmony with these rhythms, which is why they were remarkably healthy despite having no modern medicine. Hunter-gatherer societies, which anthropologists have studied in detail, had no concept of being late because they had no concept of scheduled appointments. If you were meeting friends to hunt, you gathered when the conditions were right, when the animals were moving, when the weather was good, when everyone felt ready. If it took an extra day or two, so what? The animals would still be there. Food would still be found. Life would continue at its natural, sustainable pace. These communities measured time in cycles, not linear progression. They spoke of many moons ago, or 3 summers past, or when the berries ripen again. They planned for the next season, the next migration, the next harvest. But they never said, "Meet me at sunset plus exactly 37 minutes, because they had no way to measure minutes. And more importantly, no need to. Time was abundant, flexible, and human-scaled. Archaeological evidence and anthropological studies show that these societies were remarkably healthy and happy compared to modern humans. They worked about 15 to 20 hours per week to meet all their needs, spent most of their time socializing, telling stories, making art, playing games, and developing rich spiritual practices. They had no deadlines, no rush hours, no Sunday night anxiety about Monday morning. They experienced what anthropologists call original affluence. People who had everything they needed because they needed very little and understood that enough was enough. Their children learned naturally without formal education schedules, developing skills through play and observation at their own pace. Elderly people were valued for their wisdom and stories, not discarded because they couldn't keep up with artificial productivity demands. Death was accepted as part of natural cycles, not something to be defeated through medical interventions that often create more suffering than healing. But then came agriculture around 10,000 BCE, and with it, the first seeds of time anxiety were planted in human consciousness. When humans began farming, they discovered something troubling and revolutionary. Crops don't wait for you to feel ready. Seeds must be planted at exactly the right time, tended at the right intervals, and harvested before they spoil. Miss the timing by even a few days and your family starves through the winter. For the first time in human history, people had to think about time as something that could be lost or wasted. Farmers began watching the sky obsessively, tracking the sun's path across the heavens, the moon's phases, and the movements of stars and constellations. They developed the first crude calendars by scratching marks on bones and stones, counting days until the next planting season with an accuracy that determined life or death. This shift from immediate return foraging to delayed return farming created the first-time anxiety in human history. Farmers had to work now for rewards that might come months later or might not come at all if weather, pests, or timing went wrong. This delayed gratification required a completely new relationship with time that our brains were unevolved to handle easily. These early calendars weren't just practical tools, they were sources of tremendous political and religious power. The priests and leaders who could predict the seasons, the floods, the best times for planting became incredibly valuable to their communities. Knowledge of time became knowledge of the future, and knowledge of the future meant political control over entire populations. The ancient Egyptians created one of the first sophisticated time systems around 3000 BCE, driven by the life or death importance of predicting the Nile River's annual flooding. Living along the Nile, they needed to know exactly when the flood would arrive, bringing fertile soil to their fields. Egyptian priests studied the stars with obsessive precision and realized that the bright star, Sirius, appeared just before the flood every year. This discovery led them to create a 365-day calendar that's remarkably close to our modern calendar and represented one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. But the Egyptians also made another crucial innovation that would change human consciousness forever. They divided the day into 24 parts. Using sundials, basically sticks in the ground that cast shadows, they could measure the passage of time even when the sun was hidden by clouds. This was the birth of the hour, though early hours weren't equal length. Summer hours were longer than winter hours because days and nights changed length with the seasons, maintaining some connection to natural rhythms. Egyptian society became the first civilization to live by artificial time rather than natural time. Workers had to show up at specific hours. Religious ceremonies happened at predetermined times, and government business followed regular schedules. This created the first class of people in human history who experienced time stress, the anxiety of having to be somewhere at a specific time regardless of how they felt or what their bodies needed. The ancient Babylonians took time measurement even further, dividing each hour into 60 minutes and each minute into 60 seconds. They chose 60 because it can be divided evenly by many numbers. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made calculations easier in a world without calculators or computers. Without realizing it, the Babylonians had created the precise time system we still use today, 4,000 years later. Babylonian astronomers also developed the first accurate predictions of solar and lunar eclipses, creating calendars that could predict celestial events years in advance. This gave their priests enormous power over populations who believed these predictions were communications from gods. Time knowledge became a form of magic that separated educated elites from ordinary people who lived by natural rhythms. But even with these innovations, time remained relatively relaxed and flexible for most people. Farmers still worked by natural rhythms, waking at dawn and sleeping at dusk. Only priests, astronomers, and government officials needed to track precise time measurements. For ordinary people, time was still approximate, seasonal, and fundamentally human-scaled rather than machine-scaled. The Romans began to change this relationship more dramatically. As their empire grew larger and more complex, Spanning multiple continents and governing millions of people, they needed better coordination between distant territories. Roman soldiers had to march in perfect synchronization across thousands of miles. Ships had to meet at scheduled times to transfer supplies and personnel. Government officials had to attend meetings at precise hours to coordinate imperial administration. The Romans built sundials throughout their cities and established the first public time displays, creating shared time awareness among urban populations. Roman society also created the first formal concept of work schedules. Instead of working from dawn to dusk like farmers, urban Romans divided their days into specific activities: business in the morning, bathing in the afternoon, dinner at a set time, entertainment in the evening. This was the beginning of what we now call work-life balance, the artificial idea that life should be divided into separate time compartments rather than flowing as an integrated whole. Roman legal systems developed concepts of time limits for various activities: how long trials could last, how long people had to respond to legal summons, when contracts expired. This created the first legal time pressure where missing a deadline could result in losing property, freedom, or even life. But the Romans still lived in a world where time was approximate and flexible. Their sundials didn't work at night or on cloudy days. Different cities kept slightly different times based on local solar observations. Most people still lived by natural rhythms, using time measurements only when absolutely necessary for business or government purposes. The real psychological transformation began in medieval Europe with the rise of Christianity and the invention of mechanical clocks. Christian monasteries needed to pray at specific times throughout the day and night, a practice called canonical hours. Monks had to wake up for midnight prayers called matins, then pray again at lauds, dawn, prime, 6 a.m., terce, 9 a.m., sext, noon, none, 3 p.m., vespers, evening, and compline, before bed. This created the first human communities in history that lived by completely artificial time rather than natural time. Monasteries installed water clocks and later mechanical clocks to ensure prayers happened at the correct intervals regardless of weather, season, or natural body rhythms. These early clocks were crude and inaccurate, gaining or losing hours each day. But they established a revolutionary and dangerous idea. Human activity should be regulated by machines, not by nature. The first mechanical clocks appeared in European cities around 1300 CE. These massive, expensive devices, usually installed in church towers, rang bells to mark the hours throughout the day and night. For the first time in human history, entire communities could synchronize their activities to artificial time signals rather than the position of the sun, the feeling of hunger, or their natural energy cycles. The psychological impact was enormous and immediate. Suddenly, people became aware of time passing in a completely new way. They could see that some activities took longer than others, that time could be saved or wasted, that life was made up of discrete, measurable units that were constantly disappearing forever. Medieval poems and literature began expressing anxiety about wasted time and the shortness of life in ways that would have been incomprehensible to earlier generations who lived in natural time abundance. But the real revolution came with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries. Factory owners needed workers to arrive at exactly the same time, work in perfectly coordinated shifts, and maximize production efficiency according to the rhythm of machines rather than the rhythm of human bodies. This required precise time measurement and strict time discipline that most humans had never experienced in the entire history of our species. Before factories, most people worked at their own natural pace according to their energy levels and the demands of their tasks. A blacksmith worked when customers needed horseshoes, taking breaks when tired and working intensively when motivated. A baker baked when people wanted bread, following natural cycles of supply and demand. A farmer planted when the weather was right and the soil was ready, regardless of what day or hour it happened to be. But factory workers had to surrender their natural rhythms completely to the rhythm of machines. Textile machines ran at constant speeds that determined how fast workers had to move. Steam engines created precise schedules that couldn't be adjusted for human needs. Assembly lines required workers to perform repetitive tasks at machine-determined intervals rather than natural human pacing. Factory whistles and bells regulated workers' lives with military precision that would have seemed insane to previous generations. Everyone had to arrive at the exact same time, take breaks at scheduled intervals, eat lunch in precisely measured periods, and leave when the whistle blew regardless of whether they felt finished with their work or ready to stop. Workers who were late faced punishment, lost wages, or termination. For the first time in human history, being late became a serious social problem that could cost you your livelihood and social standing. This created what historian E.P. Thompson called time discipline, the radical idea that human behavior should be regulated by clock time rather than task completion or natural rhythms. Instead of working until a job was finished, people worked for a set number of hours regardless of what got accomplished. Instead of resting when tired, people rested according to scheduled break times. Instead of eating when hungry, people ate during lunch hours. The phrase "time is money" was popularized by Benjamin Franklin in the 1740s, but it became the dominant philosophy of the industrial age. Time was no longer just a measurement, it was a commodity that could be bought, sold, saved, or wasted. Workers sold their time to employers for wages. Employers tried to extract maximum value from each hour they purchased. Time became capitalism's most important currency. This commodification of time created the modern work schedule. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of sleep. This division had nothing to do with natural human rhythms, optimal productivity, or human well-being. It was an arbitrary way to divide the day that seemed mathematically fair to both workers and employers, but ignored biological reality entirely. The invention of railroad networks in the 1800s created another massive time revolution: standardized time zones. Before railroads, every town and city kept its own local time based on the sun's position in their specific location. When the sun was directly overhead, it was noon in that place. This meant that a town 100 miles to the east would have noon about 7 minutes earlier than a town 100 miles to the west. This local time system worked perfectly when people rarely traveled long distances and most business was conducted locally. But railroads needed standardized schedules to prevent catastrophic crashes and coordinate connections between different train lines. In 1883, American railroad companies divided the continent into 4 time zones, forcing millions of people to abandon their local solar time in favor of railroad time that might be significantly different from what they observed in the sky. The psychological impact was profound and traumatic for many people. For the first time, people experienced artificial time that directly contradicted their direct observation of the sun. A factory worker might eat lunch at 12 p.m. while the sun was still visibly morning high in the sky. A farmer might be told to plant crops according to railroad time rather than local solar time that had guided agriculture for thousands of years. This disconnect between natural time and artificial time created a new form of alienation that persists and has intensified today. People began to lose trust in their own biological clocks and natural instincts, deferring instead to artificial time systems that often contradicted what their bodies and senses told them was appropriate. World War I accelerated time standardization globally as military operations required precise coordination across vast distances and multiple countries. Soldiers had to attack at exactly the same moment across hundreds of miles of front lines. Supply deliveries had to arrive on precise schedules. Communication had to be synchronized across different countries and time zones. The war created the first truly global time system. The war also introduced daylight saving time to maximize wartime production efficiency. Governments literally changed time itself, moving clocks forward in summer to give workers more daylight after the standard workday ended. This artificial manipulation of time would have seemed like pure madness to our ancestors. But by 1918, it seemed normal and practical to populations that had already surrendered their natural time instincts to artificial systems. The 20th century brought even more precise time measurement and dramatically increased time pressure. Factory assembly lines, pioneered by Henry Ford, broke work into tiny, precisely timed segments. Workers performed the same task every few seconds for 8 hours straight. This maximized mechanical efficiency but turned human beings into biological components of larger machines, completely disconnecting them from natural work rhythms. Time and motion studies analyzed workers' movements down to the second, identifying wasted motions and optimizing human behavior for maximum productivity. The natural variations in human energy, attention, and motivation were treated as inefficiencies to be eliminated through better time management rather than human characteristics to be respected and accommodated. Office work adopted similar time discipline principles. Workers punched time clocks that recorded their arrival and departure to the minute. They took scheduled breaks whether they needed rest or not. They had their productivity measured by hours worked rather than results achieved or value created. The 40-hour work week became standard not because it was optimal for human well-being or even productivity, but because it represented a political compromise between workers who wanted shorter hours and employers who wanted longer ones. Television and radio. Broadcasting created synchronized national experiences where millions of people watched the same programs at exactly the same time. For the first time in human history, people across vast distances shared identical time-based experiences, creating artificial communities united by shared schedules rather than shared geography or relationships. This increased time pressure as people felt they had to keep up with broadcast schedules to participate in national culture. The digital age has created the ultimate time acceleration and time anxiety. Computers measure time in nanoseconds, billionths of a second, that are far smaller than any human can perceive or relate to. Internet communications happen at speeds that make traditional time measurements almost meaningless. Stock trades occur in microseconds. Digital systems operate thousands of times faster than human thought, creating constant pressure to speed up human responses to match machine speeds. Modern smartphones have turned every person into a portable time measurement device more accurate than the finest timepieces owned by kings and emperors throughout history. But instead of feeling liberated by this precision, most people feel more time pressured than ever before. The constant availability of exact time creates constant awareness of time passing, time constraints, and time pressure. Email and text messages create expectations of immediate response that would have been impossible before electronic communication. Social media feeds update constantly, creating fear of missing out if you're not checking them regularly throughout the day. GPS navigation tells you exactly how many minutes your commute will take, turning every traffic delay into a source of measurable stress and frustration. The modern workplace has eliminated virtually all connection to natural time rhythms. Office buildings often have no windows, so workers lose track of day and night cycles completely. Artificial lighting allows work to continue 24 hours a day, regardless of natural sleep cycles. Global business means someone is always working somewhere, creating pressure to be always available and always responsive to artificial time demands. Many people now experience what psychologists call time anxiety or hurry sickness, a chronic feeling that there's never enough time to accomplish everything that needs to be done. They schedule their lives in 15-minute increments, multitask constantly, eat while working, and feel guilty during moments of rest or relaxation. They experience physical symptoms of stress, increased heart rate, muscle tension, sleep problems, digestive issues simply from thinking about their schedules. Sleep has become another scheduled activity rather than a natural response to darkness and fatigue. People set multiple alarms to wake up at specific times regardless of how much sleep their bodies actually need or what their natural circadian rhythms suggest. They drink caffeine to override natural fatigue cycles and take medications to force sleep according to clock time rather than biological time. Children are scheduled from early ages into artificial time systems that disrupt their natural development patterns. They're expected to learn specific subjects at specific times regardless of their individual readiness or interest cycles. They're rushed through childhood according to academic calendars rather than their own developmental timelines. Yet despite all this time measurement, time management, and time optimization, most people feel less in control of their time than ever before. Studies consistently show that people in modern societies feel more rushed and time-pressured than people in traditional societies, even though they have labor-saving devices, transportation systems, and communication technologies their ancestors couldn't imagine. The irony is profound and tragic. We created time measurement to give us more control over our lives, but time measurement ended up controlling us completely. We invented clocks to serve human needs, but we've become servants to our clocks. We developed schedules to make life more efficient and pleasant, but scheduling has made life more stressful and less enjoyable. Recent research in chronobiology, the science of biological time, reveals that our bodies still operate on the same natural rhythms that governed our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. We still have natural daily cycles of energy, attention, and mood that don't match artificial work schedules. We still need seasonal variation in activity levels. We still require flexible timing based on individual biological differences that vary from person to person. Studies show that people who work according to their natural circadian rhythms are more productive, more creative, healthier, and happier than people forced to work according to artificial schedules. Night owls forced to work morning schedules experience chronic health problems. Morning people forced to work late shifts develop mood disorders and immune system problems. Some progressive companies and countries are beginning to rediscover the value of natural time and flexible scheduling. Scandinavian countries experiment with 4-day workweeks and flexible hours that allow people to work when they are most productive. Some companies eliminate fixed meeting times in favor of scheduling around optimal energy periods. A few schools start classes later to match teenagers' natural sleep cycles, which are biologically different from adult cycles. But these experiments remain rare exceptions to the dominant time culture that governs most of modern life. The vast majority of people still wake up to alarm clocks, rush to scheduled appointments, and feel constant pressure to do more in less time according to artificial standards that have no relationship to human biological reality. The COVID-19 pandemic gave millions of people a brief, unexpected taste of life without rigid time schedules and commuting demands. Working from home, many people discovered they could be more productive without commuting, attending unnecessary meetings, or adhering to traditional office hours. They remembered what it felt like to eat when hungry, rest when tired, and work when focused rather than according to arbitrary clock times. Many people reported better sleep, improved health, stronger family relationships, and increased creativity during pandemic lockdowns when they were freed from artificial time constraints. They rediscovered natural rhythms they hadn't experienced since childhood. But as societies reopened, most people returned to pre-pandemic time pressures and schedules, treating the brief experiment with flexible time as a temporary emergency measure rather than a glimpse of a more natural and sustainable way to organize human life. The history of time teaches us that our current relationship with time is not inevitable, natural, or optimal. It's a recent human invention that we can consciously choose to change. For over 99% of human history, people lived in harmony with natural rhythms that supported health, happiness, creativity, and sustainable productivity. Our time anxiety, our scheduling obsessions, our guilt about wasted time, our constant rushing and multitasking, these are all artificial problems created by artificial time systems that we've mistaken for natural law. They not fundamental aspects of human nature, but learned responses to unnatural ways of organizing life that prioritize mechanical efficiency over human well-being. Understanding this history can be profoundly liberating. When you feel stressed about being late, remember that lateness didn't exist for 99.9% of human history. When you feel guilty about not being productive every moment, remember that our ancestors worked 15 to 20 hours per week and lived rich, fulfilling lives with strong communities and meaningful spiritual practices. When you feel overwhelmed by your schedule, remember that scheduling is a recent invention that you can choose to modify according to your actual human needs. But we can develop a much healthier relationship with time by recognizing which time pressures are truly necessary and which are arbitrary social conventions that don't serve our well-being or even our productivity. We can choose to prioritize natural rhythms over artificial schedules whenever possible. We can resist the cultural pressure to fill every moment with scheduled activities. We can remember that time is a tool we created to serve us, not a master we must serve. We can reclaim some sovereignty over our own biological clocks and natural energy cycles. The next time you check the clock and feel that familiar spike of time anxiety, take a deep breath and remember, for most of human history, that feeling didn't exist. Time pressure is not an inevitable part of life. It's a choice we make individually and collectively about how to organize human society. Maybe it's time to make different choices. Maybe it's time to reclaim time itself from the artificial systems that have turned our greatest tool into our greatest source of stress and anxiety. The clock doesn't have to rule your life unless you choose to let it.